Congratulations to the Denver Nuggets for capturing their first title in franchise history as they won last night against the Miami Heat. And we're going to get to that in just a little bit. But for the first time in 48 episodes, we're back on our own. Bakari is currently on load management. So I had to bring back the old music. You already know here in the intro, but I'm still going to give you guys some amazing content. And we're going to dive into some news, including the NBA Finals, but we're also going to talk about some possible changes around the NBA, look into some history maybe here on June 13th, and then eventually we're going to get into my 2023 NBA playoff awards. We have some interesting ones to hand out in just a little bit, but this is your early reminder to support us. We're on the road to 300 subs on the channel, and we can't get there without y'all. So if you enjoy what you're listening to at any point, support us down below, show us some love, as without further ado, this is the Anomaly Podcast. Let's get into it. We're going to start here by recapping the NBA Finals last night as the season's over. The season's finally behind us, and in just a couple weeks, we're going to have the NBA draft, and then we're going to be getting into next season, right? So crazy how fast the season turns around, right? But in the first quarter, the tone was set, right? Both teams were playing very physical. But the foul calls, they were definitely in one favor, right? As the Miami Heat got Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and Aaron Gordon all in foul trouble early. They all had two fouls here in the first quarter, if I can talk. But the game was, it was the Heat were up for a little bit. But once Kyle Lowry entered the game for the Miami Heat, the game changed, right? Lowry, at one point, his plus-minus was plus 17, and he didn't even score. He didn't even attempt a shot. He was just coming in. He was being super impactful, being a menace on both sides of the ball, and being that veteran spark the Miami Heat needed. And also, Bam Adebayo. I mean, he put up 14 first-quarter points, which without his contribution in this game for Miami, it would have been a blowout because Jimmy was just very hesitant the entire game. Transitioning to the second quarter, it was a lot of the same, right? The Heat were just maintaining that 5 to 7 point lead. And like I mentioned, Lowry continued his stretch into the second quarter, making some big shots for the Heat. But then for the Nuggets, Michael Porter finally got it going. He hasn't been very effective outside of the paint, right? Which is he's primarily on the 3-point line, catch and shoot type player, right? One or two moves, I'm gonna get my shot up. But he hasn't been very effective this entire finals. This game was his best game by a long shot. He got into the paint, second chance shots. He was attacking the board, playing some okay defense. Michael Porter was really, I think, the biggest reason they won this game here yesterday. But ultimately, the Miami Heat were up at the half by, I think, 5 or 6 points. And honestly, you could tell, even though the Heat were up a lot in this game, you can kind of tell the Nuggets were eventually going to get to that point where they were in striking distance and close the deal eventually. But, I had to stay up and I had to watch the game just in case the Heat extended the series. But in the third quarter to start the second half, the Heat had the same lead. It was the same maintained 5 or so point lead until about a minute and 30 left in the quarter. And the Nuggets, after a Michael Porter 3, I believe, they regained their lead. It was their first lead since 18-16 in the middle of the first quarter. And this game, this shows you how versatile this Nuggets team was and how well coached this team was, because in the third quarter, right, they were 3 of 23 from 3, and they still regained the lead against this Miami Heat team. But I will say, again, Kyle Lowry showed up with his veteranship, and he closed the quarter for the Miami Heat, making some big threes down the stretch there in the third. And Miami, after the third quarter, has held the lead after each and every quarter, despite the Nuggets' comeback attempts, right? But again, we're 3 quarters in, and Jimmy's been very hesitant. At this point, I believe he had 8 points on 2 of 11 shooting or something like that. So Jimmy, playoff Jimmy, was nowhere to be found. But moving over into the most important quarter, the fourth quarter, and say what you want about the refs and how they called this game, is I will say it's definitely in favor of one team than the other. But that shot by Jimmy late in the game, which put the Heat up 1 after free throws, that wasn't a foul, in my opinion. He didn't technically have ample landing space, right, to get his, to land properly, but, it wasn't a foul, right? There was no illegal contact from Aaron Gordon or Michael Porter, right, for that matter. But I get it, refs aren't perfect. The game's moving at 110, miles an hour, and it's hard to make the right call 100% of the time. It was just shocking to me that they went to the replay booth and still came up with that conclusion. But regardless, for the Miami Heat in this fourth quarter, playoff Jimmy, he didn't really turn it on until there was like 3 minutes left in the game. And I think just overall, what hurt this Heat team in this finals is they were expecting way too much from their role players, right? They were expecting way too much, especially late in games, to save Jimmy Butler, quote unquote, or to save Bam Adebayo, quote unquote. Their stars weren't stepping up and playing to their pay level, right? But I will say, Jimmy Butler in those last couple minutes, he made it interesting, made a couple threes, and then it got down to this last possession, where the Heat caught. I think they were down by one or two. I want to say two. Jimmy caught the ball, and he kind of just stood there, right? He passed it back out, got it back, and Aaron Gordon was on him at the three-point line. And with 11 seconds left, instead of driving to the paint, making a layup, going down by 1 point, Jimmy Butler catches it and shoots a fadeaway three with 11 seconds left. It was a terrible last possession. I had no clue what Jimmy was doing, right? If that was the best shot in his mind or whatever the case may be, but there was a better shot than that on the court, even if it wasn't from Jimmy Butler. But Jimmy Butler, he's now 0-2 in the finals in his career. Two great stories, though, right? In the bubble, leading that team to the finals with the run that they had, and then now being an 8 seed, right? The first 8 seed to make it since 99. Great stories from Jimmy, and he's going to grind it out, right? No matter what team he's on. But Udonis Haslem and Kyle Lowry, two veterans. We know UD is probably going to retire, but we never know with him, right? As he's practically been retired for a couple years now. And Kyle Lowry, he played some great ball in this game, but he is 37. How much more is he going to want to play? Those two guys might retire, as both of those guys might be Hall of Famers, right? But the biggest winner for me for this Miami playoff run was not Jimmy Butler, was not the fans of the Miami Heat. It was Bam Adebayo. He showed us all a consistent side offensively that we've never really seen from Bam Adebayo. And with his aggressiveness offensively and defensively, he's proved to be one of the best centers in the NBA. And he's definitely was the toughest matchup here for Nikola Jokic in the playoffs. But to me, my last note on the Miami Heat here, this series boils down to one thing: is Denver. They dared Jimmy Butler to be a Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant level of player. They dared him to make those type of shots that Kobe or Kevin Durant would make in the NBA Finals, and that's just not always Jimmy Butler's game, right? That's why creativity and tough shot making is what deflates defenses. That's why that is king in basketball, because at the end of the day, this game is about putting the ball in the bucket, right? And Jimmy Butler is not always the most aggressive when it comes to that. In my opinion, if Miami wants to get back to this point and not have to be an 8 seed, and they actually want to be taken seriously in the NBA Finals, they need to get a bucket getter, right, around Jimmy Butler. They need to get a Bradley Beal. He's going to be cheaper than a guy like Damian Lillard, but Damian Lillard is also on the table. There's guys out there that can come in and help this Miami Heat team and really put them over. And Jimmy can just be like the timely scorer and defender that he is, rather than he has to go out there and be something that he's not. And that is a player like a Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant, when it comes to shot making late in games. But for the Denver Nuggets, the difference here is their stars were stars. But I do want to shout out here to some of the role players, as Bruce Brown. He had some of his best career plays in the fourth quarter of that game. He had the putback late that put them up 3. He had that rebound, right? that he led to the putback. He also made some clutch free throws, which I had my own comments about, but he definitely caught that rebound. You could tell that Bruce Brown didn't want to pass that ball up when Jokic was wide open, so he could have got that rebound, threw it right to Jokic, and Jokic could have shot the free throws. But Bruce Brown, regardless, he stepped up, he made the free throws. So shout out to Bruce Brown, right? Amazing fourth quarter. Also, shout out to Ish Smith. He was on. This is his 13th season with his 13th team, right? So shout out to Ish Smith. He's been a journeyman, right? Quite literally. And he finally got his first ring. Same thing with DeAndre Jordan, a guy who hasn't really been good the last 5 or 6 years of his career. But we can never forget those magical days there in Lob City with the Lob City Clippers, right, with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin there in 2013 or so, the early 2010s basically. But DeAndre Jordan and Ish Smith, they get their first rings as well as basically everybody on this Nuggets team, aside from Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, right? But I want to dive into their stars here on this team, right? And I'm going to start here with Aaron Gordon, right? A guy who, with his time with the Magic, he had some great dunk contests, right? With Zach LaVine, we always know that might be the best dunk contest of all time, right? With the duel between him and Zach LaVine. But in his career, he's really just been looked at as a dunker, right, by the casual fan. And I can assure you that even the casual fan can see his true skill set now. He is now a champion. He's proven to be much more than just a highlight dunker, right? Michael Porter Jr., this is a guy who was once the best high school player in the world, but due to his back injuries, he fell all the way to 14 or so in the lottery. He fell all the way into the Nuggets' lap. They gave him plenty of time to get his feet back under him and get comfortable on the court. He's been heavily questioned in his career because of his injuries and all that stuff. But he's playing a role that isn't his true potential, right, with this Nuggets team. But he's still doing a pretty good job in that role. And he's now a champion. Michael Porter, we know, has the talent to be much more than what he is for this Nuggets team. But he's still doing what his role is now to his fullest potential. And he's a huge reason this team has won the finals this year. Jamal Murray, look, second best player in this team, no doubt, right? But Jamal Murray, he had a bad knee injury after the bubble. And he was looked at by the casual fan as he was an overpaid, damaged goods, right, at the point guard position. He was questioned all season, and there's multiple people that were saying, let's trade Jamal Murray for Damian Lillard. Let's trade Jamal Murray for whoever else, right? But this Nuggets team, they stuck to their identity. They stuck to their core. And this is a guy, Jamal Murray, who was questioned on if he was still the same player that he was in the 2020 bubble. He came back this year and he turned out to be better than than he's ever been in his career. He's now a champion, right? And he was a big reason this team won, right? If I need to keep saying that. But Nikola Jokic, this is a guy who's won Finals MVP, right? I mean, he might have had his worst game in Game 5 there, and he had 27 and 16. There's no big man, I think, at least in a long time, that has had an entire offense run through him like this, right, to how Jokic is doing it. We've seen the typical back-to-the-basket bigs like Shaq and Tim Duncan, but we haven't seen a guy like Nikola Jokic that's inside, outside the paint. He's just, everything runs through Nikola Jokic. It's almost like you're playing 2K with your created big, and everything runs through you. But this guy is now in the conversation for top 5, top 3 big that this game has ever seen. And, I mean, right now, is he the best player in the world? I think it's okay to say that now. I think a lot of people would say he is the best player in the world, but I would just, my co-host and I, if he comes back, we're going to eventually do some player rankings. We're eventually going to give our top 10, top 5 players in the world. And Nikola Jokic, if he's not number 1 for me, he's probably 1B, right? But I think we can't. Let's not quickly forget the other players that we have in this league. But regardless, back to Denver. They won their first title in franchise history. Their 47-year franchise history was the longest in NBA history to that point for a franchise to have not won a ring. And like I said, we just witnessed history. Shout out to this Nuggets team. Shout out to everybody. Shout out to Mike Malone, right? I think that, what's awesome about Mike Malone is the first thing he says after winning a championship is, we want more, right? We want to come back next year with the same team and do this yet again. So he never stops. He's a super uber competitor. But I just want to throw this thought out there before we go on to the next topic. Imagine if the Nuggets chose Jusuf Nurkic over Nikola Jokic. The butterfly effect from that would have been insane, right? We're not sitting here talking about the Nuggets with a championship on their team for sure, but the butterfly effect, I mean, it was crazy. That was once a conversation. Moving over to around the league, just some quick news that's going on around the general NBA. It's been heavily rumored that James Harden will make his return to Houston this summer. We know that. We've talked about it here on the pod. But if he doesn't, multiple reports have been saying that the Rockets would have a small interest in bringing in a guy like Kyrie Irving. Houston's going to have about $60 million freed up this offseason. So though this is probably far from probable logically Financially, however, when that much money is thrown at you, anything will sound probable, right, at this point. It would be a very questionable fit for me on paper with a guy like Kyrie and Jalen Green sharing a backcourt. Two great scorers, but they're two undersized, subpar individual defenders that can't stop a cold, right, let alone elite scorers that we have here in the NBA. It's also hard to believe that Kyrie would do this, right, coming from a neighboring team here in Texas in the Dallas Mavericks, with the big difference being that Luka's a top 3 player, Jalen Green is an unproven second or third year guy, right, that still needs to spread his wings. So he'd be going basically from the same defensive situation, but he's downgrading from a top 3 player in the world to Jalen Green. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but again, money is such a powerful thing, and I could see Kyrie making that jump. The Toronto Raptors, they hired Darko Rajakovic. Hopefully, I didn't mispronounce that too bad, but he's going to be their next head coach. It's a guy that he's been an assistant head coach with Memphis for the last 3 years as they've built that city back up and they built that team back up. Obviously, they have some questions off the court, right, with their star player, but they've been a great team nonetheless. He's also been an assistant in OKC and Phoenix, and he's also coached in the G League as well as in Spain in his native Serbia. He's also worked as an assistant with the Serbian national team. So this guy's had a decorated career. Toronto's hoping for more player development, right, over Nick Nurse with this new coach and his new regiment. So maybe they get that, right? I will say that Toronto also has no plans to bring back Fred VanVleet, who has declined his $22 million player option, as well as Gary Trent. But Toronto Raptors, seems like they're resetting a little bit, taking a couple steps back, take even more forward. We'll see how well that turns out for them. But Portland, they plan to re-sign Jeremy Grant. They also have interest in trading for a guy like DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton, former number 1 overall pick, let's not forget. A change of scenery could be everything for him right now. But the NBA, they have been contemplating changing the NBA AllStar Format. Since 2018, the lead vote getters from each conference have been named captains and have selected their teams, as most of you know, not to insult your intelligence. I would assume that format was to make the game more fun, more competitive. You kind of got to pick a side and go with it, aside from just watching the game. But the game hasn't really turned out that way, right? But the NBA is considering a U.S. versus the world format. In the past, the league, per reports, has been resistant to this idea, as that idea would give approximately 100 international players a much greater chance of landing one of the 12 All-Star spots compared to the other team, which would be the Team USA, which they would have to pick 12 players from a pool of 300 guys, right? So it's definitely a lopsided thing there in the NBA, but the only change under immediate consideration per Adam Silver is reverting back to the traditional East versus West format next year. It's going to be in Indiana, and though I don't think that we're going to be getting a world versus U.S. format, I think the world would quite literally kill the U.S. Imagine a team of Luka, Giannis, Jokic, right, and the other talented guys that we have here in the NBA. They would kill us, right? Because I think these European players and these foreign players take these exhibition games a bit more seriously than Team USA, especially nowadays. But the last thing I'll say is if they do bring back the East versus West format, let the players wear their own jerseys, right? Go back to the early 2000s, the late 1990s. Let these players show what team they play for, right? For the casual fan, let them wear their own jerseys, come to this game, and I think it just adds a lot more color, a lot more uniqueness, right? Not everybody's wearing the same jerseys each and every year. I think it's just a small detail, right? But I think everybody will love it here, at least for us fans, right? But moving over to On This Day, it's a topic and it's a segment here, I guess is a way to put it, that was recommended to me by my dad, if I could talk. And it's something that we haven't done here in a while, but since I'm alone and Bakari's not here today, I said, why not? Let's bring it back, right? And we're going to look throughout the NBA history on June 13th, and we're going to start here in 1989. as the Detroit Pistons, they completed their sweep against the Los Angeles Lakers, and they got their first title in franchise history. Moving over to 1993, where the Phoenix Suns, they beat the Chicago Bulls in triple overtime of Game 3 in the 93 finals. It was only the second triple overtime game in finals history, and Kevin Johnson of the Phoenix Suns, he set an NBA Finals record of playing 62 minutes, and his teammate was right there as he played 59, as that is Dan Marley. That is a crazy game, right, to watch in the NBA Finals. Imagine especially if it was a West Coast game, you're going to be up until like 2 in the morning just watching an NBA Finals game. But in 97, the Chicago Bulls, they defeated the Utah Jazz in Game 6 of the NBA Finals for their 5th NBA title. Michael Jordan, he was the Finals MVP, and let's not forget that he trusted Steve Kerr late in that game, and Steve Kerr stepped up, made a big shot here. I believe it was a mid-range or it was a three-pointer top of the key. Regardless, Steve Kerr stepped up, made a big shot, and this Bulls team won their 5th ring. And then finally in 2019, the Toronto Raptors, they defeated Golden State in Game 6 to seal their franchise's first NBA championship, the first title in league history for a Canadian team. The Toronto Raptors, it was a special season. You know, they went and they traded DeMar DeRozan and some picks for Kawhi Leonard, and Kawhi Leonard came into Toronto, and he was later named Finals MVP, being the 3rd player in league history to win the award with 2 different franchises. So Kawhi Leonard, I mean, we can't talk about how great of a player he is enough. It just, it sucks that we don't get to see him that healthy, right, anymore here year in and year out, and he's still recovering from a knee injury from this playoffs. So hopefully Kawhi Leonard doesn't take too big of a step off next season. But okay, we're going to get into our NBA playoff awards here, as we're going to start here. We're not going to waste your time, right? We already know some of these are obvious, but let's get into it, as we're going to start with the MVP award. And an honorable mention here is Jimmy Butler. But again, after Jimmy Butler's ankle injury against Josh Hart, he was never quite the same on the basketball court that we saw early on before that injury. But it's a no-brainer, with or without that ankle injury. Nikola Jokic is the playoff MVP here for the podcast, right? As unless somebody else is averaging a triple-double and wins the NBA Finals, this playoff MVP award is pretty much sewn up here for Nikola Jokic, right? Signed, sealed, and delivered. He's been that much better than everybody else in this throughout this entire postseason. He is the first player in league history to lead the NBA playoffs in points, rebounds, and assists. 50 players have averaged over 30 points across a minimum of 12 games in a single postseason, right? But of that group, only 12 players also averaged at least 12 boards. However, right, none of those guys match the level of the assist levels of Nikola Jokic, so basically my point here is with that stat is what Nikola Jokic has done this postseason is unprecedented, right? And that's from a statistical standpoint. If you want the eye test, I'll give you the eye test, right? From the eye test, I see a guy in Nikola Jokic that is orchestrating an offense unlike any we've seen in a very long time, while being much better on the defensive side of the ball than he gets credit for on a year in and year out basis. From the eye test, I see a superstar that might have solidified himself as the best player in the NBA, and he just gave his city their first title in franchise history. This is a no-brainer of a pick. Nikola Jokic, for me, is the MVP here in the NBA playoffs. We're going to move over here to the DPOY. As a honorable mention for me would be Bam Adebayo, as a guy we talked about earlier, showed great flashes here in this postseason and really changed the narrative around his name when it comes to postseason time. But my winner is Anthony Davis, a guy who was a part of one of 2 play-in teams ever in history to make the conference finals. Let's not forget the type of player AD was here in this postseason. Across 16 playoff games that Davis played in, he accumulated a postseason high 1.4 defensive win shares, the most in the league by far. In the first round of the playoffs, he blocked an incredible 26 shots in the first 6 games against the Memphis Grizzlies. Really, I mean, he had a couple games with 7 blocks, a couple with 5 or so. Incredible. It looked like a my career player there with Anthony Davis, at least defensively, in that first round. But in the second round, the only offensive success that the Golden State Warriors had against this Los Angeles Lakers team, it was whenever Davis was either on the bench or when he was out of the paint, right? When he was away from the basket. The Warriors posted a 110 offensive rating against the Lakers, down from their 117 during the regular season. So their offensive rating, I know it's only 7 points, right? But that is a drastic change from the regular season to the postseason. Davis even stepped out from the eye test, and he even played good defense on the perimeter, whether if it was on Steph Curry on switches or on Klay Thompson, right? Especially that switch on to Curry. It was game 3 or 4, but Davis slowed Curry down. He made him miss the shot, and that shot could have changed the entire series, right? Now, sure, in round 3 against the Denver Nuggets, Anthony Davis's inability to slow down Nikola Jokic at all, right? It got to the point where they put Rui on him. That was a big reason why they got swept. But I want to say that doesn't detract from what is otherwise the most statistically dominant defensive effort of any player in this postseason. Anthony Davis finished this postseason with 50 blocks and 22 steals. He's a big reason why this Lakers team from the midseason mark was the number 2 defense in the world. And then in the playoffs, they were one of the best defenses in the postseason. Anthony Davis is quite literally an anchor, right? And he just got outplayed for one series. So let's not forget what he did the other 12 games here in the NBA postseason. My rookie of the year, let me just put it out there like this, okay? My honorable mentions are Austin Reeves and Josh Hart. I know De'Aaron Fox is not a rookie, okay? I'm not a casual, but these are playoff awards. And this was De'Aaron Fox's first playoff appearance. So for this award here, hopefully you can understand this, is I went based off of playoff experience, not league experience. And I'm going to start here by acknowledging the season that the Sacramento Kings put together. They had 2 All-Stars. They ended with 50-plus wins. They were the number 3 seed in the West. And ultimately, the biggest thing is that they ended their franchise's 16-year playoff drought, which was the longest in the major sports that we have here in today, right? Not to mention, he also took the reigning champs at the time, the Golden State Warriors, to 7 games in the first round. If Steph didn't drop at the time the most points ever in a Game 7, we would have had a very interesting second-round series with the Sacramento Kings and the Los Angeles Lakers. It was all of this whole season, right? Domantas Sabonis was great, right? He was also an All-Star, but this was all led by De'Aaron Fox, a guy that was the NBA clutch time leader in points, and he led this team to an amazing season. In the first 6 games of his first-round series against the Warriors, right, he averaged 29, 8, and 6. Let's not forget that in Game 7, sure, he disappeared, but that was after he basically broke his hand. I think it was in Game 5 or 6. He basically broke his hand, and he was still going out there and playing at the best that he could for his team, right? Regardless, it was an amazing debut playoff run from De'Aaron Fox. I'm excited for this offseason for them to see. I think they have a good culture built in just 1 year there in Sacramento, so it's interesting to see who's going to sign with them, who would like to be traded there. And of course, I just want to see how this team responds next year and plays next year, as only up from here. At least you would imagine, right? Moving over to my most improved player, and look, I'm just going to say this. This was one player and one player only. There was no honorable mentions here for this award. To me, it is Devin Booker. When we try and find a modern-day Kobe Bryant, it's not Jason Tatum, it's not Kevin Durant, it's not anybody else. It's Devin Booker, right? This is a guy who has had playoff success the last 2 years. Don't get me wrong, right? He's been to the finals. He's been to the Western Conference Finals the last 2 years. But the eye test says something completely different. This is a guy that was so much more comfortable this postseason, getting to his spots, getting his shots up, putting tons of pressures on defenses, and he was efficient while doing all of that. This is a guy who helped take 2 games off of the Denver Nuggets, which no other team did this postseason, and Devin Booker in that series, multiple 40-point games, multiple 30-point games. This is an injured Phoenix Suns team that was led by 2 stars, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and Devin Booker had a better postseason than Kevin Durant, and he was a big reason this team took down the Denver Nuggets 2 times here in the postseason that no other team could do. His defense, let's not forget about that. That was there too. This is a team that it was needed, right? Because their star point guard Chris Paul was out, as his annual vacation starts when the playoffs do, and their defensive center DeAndre Ayton, he was too emotionally caught up in his own right to actually focus on the court. This team also had no depth, right? So Devin Booker had to be there offensively, defensively. He had to do everything for this Phoenix Suns team. But if you want the statistics, right, the only real statistic I pulled out of this was that his points per game has gone up by 10 points from last postseason. But just in my opinion, the eye test told me something completely different. I believe this team is going to be back with a vengeance next year. And if this team is going to compete for a title next year, I believe it'll be more so because of Devin Booker than Kevin Durant. Might be a hot take, but I think Devin Booker has to be the leader of this team, quote-unquote, to win at a high level. Moving over to our sixth man of the year, some honorable mentions. I mean, Bruce Brown, it's hard not to put him here, right, especially after last night. Derek White, Austin Reeves is another guy that we can throw in there. But the only reserve to rank among the top 10 in the postseason win shares, right, out of all players. So the only player that was primarily a bench player that was top 10 in win shares was Caleb Martin. And I believe that is a big reason why I'm having him win this award. And I will say this. Now, I will say, Caleb Martin, right? He did have 4 postseason starts with 20-plus points. But he's put up at least a dozen points off the bench 9 different times in these playoffs. And he's done much more than that during the this Miami's miracle run, right? As they fell short of the finals, as we know, but getting there was their story, in my opinion. This is a guy, Caleb Martin, that has provided 3 double-digit rebounding games, as well as 3-point shooting, some defense along the way. And if Caleb Martin hadn't embraced a more aggressive offensive mindset, it's hard to imagine this Heat team would have survived Tyler Herro's absence as well as they did. And if he didn't take those difficult defensive assignments as well, perhaps Jimmy Butler wouldn't have had the energy to carry such a heavy scoring burden early in the playoffs, especially against the Milwaukee Bucks, right? So this is a guy who took difficult defensive assignments. This is a guy who stepped up offensively and helped out in Tyler Herro's absence, as well as giving Jimmy a break at times, right? To me, the ideal 6-man makes contributions based off what the team needs game to game, right? That is what you look for in a 6-man. It's not always just scoring, right? And I think that is exactly what Caleb Martin has done in this playoffs. I mean, averaging 13, 5.5, shooting 40+% from the three-point line, and being on a team that is the first playing team to ever make the NBA Finals. Caleb Martin was the ideal 6-man, and he really got himself some money this postseason run. Moving over to Coach of the Year, this is not in question, right? You could say Darvin Ham, you could say Mike Malone, or maybe even Joe Mazzulla. That is a question in itself. But to me, this is Eric Spoelstra's award. You know, even though this team just lost last night, this is Spoel's award, right? We're talking about a guy who's already named to the NBA's list of the 15 greatest coaches in NBA history. And the culture that Spoel has built in Miami, as well as Pat Riley, it was on full display here on their improbable run to the NBA Finals. You know, NBA coaches, let's put it out there, they build their reputations in plenty of ways, but one of the most effective ways, to me, is basically when you have an undermatched team, right, or when you're facing overmatched teams, and you take them and you continue to win, make adjustments, and go on deep playoff run. It's extended so many coaching careers to have magical runs. And I think when we can't explain how or why an entire roster levels up at the right time or takes a step up right before playoff time, they flip that switch in a way to say it. It's hard to explain why that happens. It's always good to credit the person that is running the show, right? In this case, it is Eric Spoelstra. Whether if it was Duncan Robinson, who was getting D&Ps all season, playing what's easily been the best postseason minutes of his career, right? Or playing the zone, or switching to the zone defense that we don't see in professional sports really, but relying on a zone defense with the talent that he had and finding ways to succeed whether Jimmy Butler was playing like a superstar level player or if he was disappearing for quarters or halves at a time. Eric Spoelstra's fingerprints were all over this team's success this postseason, and this is a team that made the NBA Finals with a negative point differential. And along the way, they had multiple upset wins, right? If I need to remind you, it's on the right side of your screen. They started with the Milwaukee Bucks, which, again, the Milwaukee Bucks were my favorite to win the entire thing. I believe Giannis, this was his year to get his number 2 ring, right? But Giannis did miss some games in the first series, right? Sure, right? But you control what you can control for the Miami Heat. And the Miami Heat took care of business with Giannis being out. They won in 5 games, took down the number 1 seed in the playoffs. Then they moved on to the gritty New York Knicks team that dominated the Cavs in the first round. And this is the Knicks team that had the number 2 regular season offense. The Miami Heat, they showed out, they won in 6 games. Then they go to the Eastern Conference Finals. And they're facing the winner from last year, the Boston Celtics. They win in 7 after being up 3-0. Let's not forget that. All of this was done without home court advantage or the services of Tyler Hero, who might have been their best offensive weapon. Right, Spo is Spo. Spo again he's done it yet again, being the coach of the first play-in team to ever make the NBA Finals. You can't say enough about Erik Spoelstra, and to me, this award might be more given, or might be more obvious than the MVP. Just to finish it off here, we have Jordan Poole, a guy who is the least valuable player, right? This is an award that the only other honorable mention is the entire Cavs team, and I can say that as a Cavs fan, right? But the entire Cavs team, whether if it was Darius Garland, aside from Game 2, or Donovan Mitchell, or Evan Mobley, or Jared Allen saying the lights were too bright, the entire Cavs team, from the coaching to the players, they were completely embarrassing this postseason as a Cavs fan, right? But my winner here is going to be Jordan Poole, right? And to be completely honest, the numbers on the screen might actually do him some justice, right? With how damaging he was to the Warriors in this postseason run. I will say, the stats do fail to capture, his constant over-dribbling and childish pursuit of highlight plays, many of which, resulted in bad shots or turnovers. Jordan Poole looked like the average player you would see in NBA 2K, right, in the rec, right? When you see a guy late in the game, he plays hero ball, and that's what it looks like when you watch Jordan Poole play, right? But Jordan Poole was the definition of trying to do too much here in this postseason run for the Golden State Warriors. And I also say, the stats don't show how bad of a defensive performance he gave this postseason. The best that could be said about Jordan Poole in this postseason was that he was active, right? He was playing physical defense, right? But he was so aimless and undisciplined, which is un-Warrior-like for any player, that at times he was just unplayable, and you saw that a lot, where Steve Kerr took him out, and then he took to Twitter on his burner accounts to complain that these young players on the Warriors aren't getting enough minutes. Jordan Poole has played way better than this in the playoff runs, especially last year when they won the finals. But you have to do more than just hit a couple half-court shots to be relevant in the playoffs, especially when you're trying to take down a hungry LeBron James and Anthony Davis that we're looking to finally get back to the top of the mountain. But moving over here to a recap, just in general, of the awards that we have today, as Nikola Jokic was my MVP, no doubt there, right? Defensive Player of the Year was Anthony Davis, a guy who helped bring a play-in team to the Western Conference Finals. Rookie of the Year, again, this is based off of playoff experience, not league experience, but it is De'Aaron Fox. The most improved player was Devin Booker. Sixth Man of the Year was Caleb Martin. Coach of the Year was Erik Spoelstra, as the Heat get 2 awards here on their magical run to the Promised Land, right? And the least valuable player was Jordan Poole. Honorable mention, of course, I'll mention the entire Cavs team, as we underperformed here in the playoffs. But that is going to do it for today's show. A quicker show, right? But I guess that is expected when Bakari is not here going on his average his average Cavs and Houston Rockets rant. But I'm not sure if he'll be back Thursday, right? If he's back Thursday from load management, again, we're going to have a great mock draft here on the channel, our second one here. And just like we did with the NFL, we're going to have some trades involved on the second mock draft. We're going to get crazy, right? This is the one where it's not always going to be super realistic, but we're going to make it fun. And I think a mock draft with trades is the best way to do that. But regardless, we're going to have some fun here Thursday. We have some fantasy football content coming tomorrow and Friday. So again, 4 days a week here on the channel. We're grinding. We're pumping out great content. So if you enjoy the channel at all, right, at this point, if you made it this far, you can tolerate me a little bit. Go ahead and support us down below. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel. It all goes a super long way as we're on the road to 300 subs on the channel, and we can't get there without you guys, right? No surprise. But that is going to do it. We'll see you guys tomorrow with some players that you want to draft in fantasy football, your favorite sleepers from rounds 9 through 16, and that's going to be some fun, right? But without further ado, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Stay happy, stay healthy. We're out.